The steakhouse was too loud. Crystal glasses clinked too sharply, the laughter too well rehearsed, the waitstaff too eager. It smelled of aged beef and desperation. Somewhere near the grand piano, my mother was telling someone I worked in tech, something with logistics. I caught the glance she gave me when she said it. Vague, dismissive, safe. My name is Valerie Reed, and I was the one paying for the wine they kept pouring like water. The chandeliers above flickered gently, casting soft light over polished silverware, and conversations dripping with pretension. But I wasn't here to bask in it. I was here because I had arranged it. Every inch of the room, every name on the reservation list, every flower at the centerpiece, cherry blossoms, my father's favorite, was chosen by me. 65th birthday. A milestone. A tribute to the man who raised me, who once rebuilt an entire engine just so I could drive myself to prom. I remembered the oil under his fingernails, the calluses that cracked in the cold. He never said it, but I knew he regretted never making it. So I did, and tonight I planned to show him. When dessert came out, individual soufflés with gold-dusted berries, I stood, walked around the table, and placed the velvet box in front of him. His fingers paused over the fork. "What's this?" I didn't speak. Let him open it. The room quieted as he undid the clasp. Silence. Then a soft intake of breath. A Rolex. Oyster Perpetual Day Date. Gold, just like the one he saw once in a pawn shop and said, "One day, if we ever become something, maybe." He blinked, held it up, and then he laughed. "Jesus, Val," he said, turning to the room. "She thinks buying me a watch makes her a daughter again." The laughter came in waves. My mother tensed, but didn't stop him. Owen clapped his hands like a seal at SeaWorld. And I stood frozen. I didn't flinch, didn't respond, just smiled. My fingers curled so tightly they left half-moons on my palms. My father held the watch to the light. "Well," he said, slipping it on. "At least it tells time." They laughed again. What they didn't notice, I never sat back down. Instead, I walked slowly toward the bar, where a man in a navy blazer had just arrived, checking his watch. My watch. The one I had bought months ago, along with 2 others. "Right. On time," he murmured. "Just as we planned." "Is the paper ready?" I asked. He nodded, pulled out the manila folder. Power of attorney revocation. Property title reassignment. All notarized. All waiting for a single signature. Mine. I signed them. 1 stroke, clean. Because the truth was, this wasn't a dinner. It was a deadline. Back at the table, they toasted. To old-school values, my father smirking behind his glass. My mother leaned over to someone and said, "She means well, just doesn't understand where real respect comes from." The irony. I paid for the candles that lit her face, the chef who prepared her duck à l'orange, the valet waiting outside to take their keys. They wanted power. I gave them comfort. But tonight, I took it back. As I passed behind my brother, I heard him mutter to his girlfriend, "Bet she's waiting for Dad to cry and thank her." Classic Valerie move, but the girlfriend didn't laugh. She looked at me, really looked, and then down at the empty chair where I had been. Smart girl. My father would later claim he was joking, that I took things too personally, that he'd never meant to hurt me, but something told me he knew exactly what he was doing, because the Rolex wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol, and he broke it. I walked out of the restaurant, not because I was upset, but because the moment the laughter died down and the bill arrived, they would realize I had left something behind, something small, but critical. The card. The rye. One linked to every recurring payment on their mortgage, electricity, gas, and insurance. Cut. Canceled. Cold. The second I stepped into my car, a notification pinged. Transfer canceled. Automatic payment failed. I smiled. This wasn't revenge. It was arithmetic. For 12 years, I kept the lights on in that house. I paid for Owen's debts, Mom's prescriptions, Dad's shed renovation he called his legacy project, and every time I told myself, maybe this will be the moment they see me. They did. They just saw a bank. What they didn't see, the folder I left in my mother's purse. Yes, I'd placed it there while leaning over her shoulder for a hug. Inside, the final invoice, labeled neatly, freedom. Let's see how they pay that one. If you've ever stood in a room full of people who love your money but not you, subscribe. Because next, you'll see what happens when I stop being their fallback plan and become their reckoning. 3 days. After the dinner, I stood in my kitchen and watched the electric kettle hum its way toward a boil. No one had called. No one had said a word about what happened at the restaurant, not even a sarcastic text from Owen. That was how I knew they were planning their next move. My phone buzzed just as the kettle clicked off. A Venmo request for $212.75. Mom's MRI plus driveway seal coat, urgent, no context. No please. No thank you. Just a $sign and 2 vastly different expenses bundled into one request, like I was some vending machine that dispensed stability and silence at the push of a button. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled up my financial records. I wanted to confirm something I'd always suspected but never had the stomach to face. How much had I actually given them? Mortgage payments, $2,200 a month for 6 years. Car repairs, house upgrades, health bills, and Owen's debt emergencies, $134,000. Add in small things, subscriptions, random transfers, urgent purchases, easily another $60K, rough total, over $412,000. I blinked at the number. Then, again. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel mine. The next morning, my mother texted, "Can we talk? I made muffins." I drove over in silence, not out of guilt, but because I wanted to see the stage they'd set. I needed to study the players when they thought the scene was still theirs. Susan Reed greeted me at the door in her floral apron, her smile a little too bright. "You look tired," she said. "I'm not. Working too much," she added, softly, leading me into the kitchen. "You always do that when something's wrong." Muffins sat cooling on the counter. Banana walnut, my favorite, 10 years ago. She remembered the flavor, not the fact I became allergic to walnuts 2 years ago. That was the first sign. We sat. She offered tea. I declined. Then came the story. The MRI, her back pain, the house falling apart. And Raymond, she whispered, was not sleeping well. His pride, it's wounded. "You embarrassed him," she said. "I embarrassed him?" I repeated. "You know how he is," she said, touching my hand. "He's just old-fashioned. But he loves you, Valerie." The word love sat there like a placeholder for accountability. She leaned closer. "I did something. A little impulsive," she said. "To help with the bills. Just a stopgap." She reached for a folder from the counter. Inside were reimbursement forms, insurance, home repairs, paid out to her. But something was wrong. My name was signed at the bottom. "I don't remember authorizing these," I said. "I knew you'd understand," she said. "It was just easier to do it that way. You always help." So that was it. Not just the bills, not just the silence. She forged my signature on government forms and said it like I should be grateful. I looked at the date on the first document. 2 years ago. This wasn't a moment of desperation. This was a system, a structure, an infrastructure built on my silence. You used my name. Our daughter. You used my legal identity to move money. She paused. You always said you'd handle things when they needed handling. It was true. I had said that. Too many times. It had become a mantra. I stood. "Where are you going?" she asked, voice still soft. "I need time," I said. I knew this would upset you. I shouldn't have shown you. I just thought, "No," I said. "You just thought I'd keep paying." She reached for my wrist. Not roughly, just enough to stop me. "He doesn't mean to hurt you, Val." And there it was. He didn't hurt me. I was just sensitive. She was just caught in the middle. I left the muffins on the table and walked out. On my way home, I remembered something from the restaurant. A man I didn't recognize, sitting near the edge of the room, quiet, watching. He hadn't spoken to anyone, just observed. I had thought he was a +1 or maybe one of Owen's friends. I found out later. He was a notary, one my mother had used, on forms with my forged signature. A few weeks before the party, she'd told me she wanted to get her. Affairs in order. I had assumed she meant health stuff. Wills. Legacy talk. What she meant was documents, access, power, and she'd brought the notary to the party. The night of the Rolex, like a trap, in heels, I filed it away. The next morning, I received another Venmo request, 100. Garage door replacement plus Dad's glasses. I didn't respond. 3 hours later, Owen called. "Hey," he said, casual. "Mom said you're acting weird. Everything okay?" She forged my signature. He paused. Too long. Mom wouldn't do that, not unless she had to. "Did you know?" "No, I mean, I knew about the forms, but not that." "So you knew?" She was just trying to protect Dad. The credit score thing. "What credit score thing?" Silence, then. "Forget it, doesn't matter." "It does now." He hung up. I sat there for a long time. Not angry, just suspended. Like everything was still moving, but I had stepped out of the frame. That night, I logged into an old bank account I hadn't checked in a year. It had been created years ago, jointly, when I helped them co-sign on a refinance. I'd forgotten about it. There were 3 withdrawals in the past 2 months. $8,000 total. To a checking account in Owen's name. I stared at the screen. The account was still active, still had my name on it, still vulnerable. I changed the password, transferred what was left into a secure escrow. Then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Draft me a formal revocation," I said. "Full financial separation, effective immediately." He didn't ask why, because he already knew. The day after I shut down the joint account, I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows in my home office and listened to the silence. Not peace, silence. The kind that stretches, the kind that listens. Ack. It had been nearly a week since the dinner, and all I'd heard from my family was stillness, not even a shallow guilt text, not even Owen. And that's when I understood. They weren't angry. They weren't ashamed. They were strategizing. I had underestimated how skilled they were at turning absence into control. At noon, my assistant called. "There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Owen. Told her to send him in. He entered the room like a man looking for a way out before he'd even said hello. Baseball cap, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes that looked less like fatigue and more like a permanent feature now. "I didn't want to come," he said. "But Mom asked." "Of course she did. She's scared, Val. She should be." He shifted uncomfortably. "You froze the account?" "It was never meant to stay open this long. But Dad's retirement payments go through that routing number, so change it. You know he doesn't know how. He rebuilt a carburetor from scratch in the dark when I was 16. He'll figure it out." He winced, not at the sarcasm, but at the refusal to play the script. I wasn't angry. That's what threw him off. I was clean. Surgical. Look, he said, pulling out a crumpled envelope from his hoodie. I don't know how this got past you, but Mom said to give it to you. Said it would explain everything. I took the envelope without opening it. It smelled like her perfume. Eucalyptus and lavender. She always sprayed everything, even documents. When Owen left, I waited until the house was completely still. Then I opened it. Inside were 5 printed emails, all formatted as if they were from my company's finance team. One even had my assistant's name, all requesting fund transfers, all referencing a fictitious project, Loggy Green Emergency Phase 2. Each email ended with a line. As previously discussed with Ms. Valerie Reed, please process this urgently. Personal approval pre-cleared. My chest tightened. Not from emotion, from recognition. Because 3 of the email headers had real internal codes, things only someone inside my company would know. I opened my laptop and cross-referenced the metadata. They had spoofed my company, created fake domains, used language only an insider would recognize. I picked up the phone. Grace, I said to my assistant, has anyone outside ever been granted admin-level access to the server archives? There was a pause. No, unless they came. Through the family filter. Remember when your mom needed help recovering those tax files? We gave her limited access. I mean, it was just temp. How limited? Read only. But she may have forwarded things. Of course she did. The access they had was never about theft. It was about confidence. They had been in my systems, watching, learning, not just using me financially, studying me. I returned to the emails. One had a forwarded chain. The original message was from me to a consulting partner in Austin. Subject line, we'll handle it internally. That message had been cut, repurposed, and injected into the fake thread, making it appear I had given verbal approval for nearly $25,000 in untraceable transfers. Then came the detail I hadn't noticed earlier. The recipient of all the spoofed requests, a private vendor I had flagged a year ago during an internal audit. Haven Point Design and Build, supposedly a construction consultancy. I pulled the vendor log. 3 payments, 2 for emergency property upgrades. 1 for structural exterior compliance. I recognized the address. It wasn't a commercial building. It was my parents' lake house, a property I didn't even know they still had. I thought they'd sold it when Dad's back gave out. Apparently, they didn't. They just upgraded it. With my money. I picked up the envelope again. Read the note in my mother's handwriting. You always said you wanted us to be safe and taken care of. This was just our way of making that happen without bothering you. Without bothering me. As if forged contracts, impersonating my assistant, and laundering money through a shell vendor was a courtesy. That's when it clicked. This hadn't been reactive, it had been rehearsed, and I hadn't stopped it. Because every time something felt off, an overcharge, a missing receipt, a misquoted invoice, I had let it slide. I had chosen silence, and they had mistaken it for submission. That night, I called my lawyer. I want everything traced, every vendor, every payment. He asked me the question I knew was coming. Are you ready to go to war with your family? I didn't answer, because the truth was worse. I'd already been at war. I just hadn't realized I was the only one playing defense. Before I slept, I logged into the cloud storage system and re-enabled the system alert protocol we'd developed for fraud scenarios. It triggered a silent ping on my phone within 5 minutes. Someone was still logging in, from a device registered under my name, in. My mother's home. I watched the access log track every file they opened. Old contracts, retirement account summaries, password request templates. She wasn't panicking. She was preparing, which meant, so should I. The invitation arrived 2 weeks after I revoked financial control. A glossy, embossed envelope with navy trim, old money design for a family still, pretending they had any. Inside, a card in my mother's handwriting. Dinner in your father's honor. Just family this time. Let's not let pride ruin everything. I turned it over. On the back, in smaller script, please don't make this awkward. It was always phrased like that. My reaction as the threat, their actions as the status quo. But I accepted the invitation. Not out of sentiment, and certainly not for closure. I went because I knew they wanted me there. And when people want something badly enough, they make mistakes. The house was already packed when I arrived. I recognized nearly everyone. Uncles, cousins, a few of Dad's friends from the auto shop days, and some newer faces, half of whom I suspected didn't even know what the dinner was about. The table was set with their best china. The wine flowed. The conversation steered clear of anything heavier than local gossip. Owen avoided eye contact. My mother flitted between rooms with practiced grace, her smile so polished it could have sliced glass. I stayed quiet, present, neutral. I let the room wrap itself around the illusion they needed, that I was still a daughter, still a provider, still invested in their myth of functional family. But the tension shifted when my father stood with his glass raised. He didn't tap the side. He didn't wait for silence. He simply began, his voice cutting clean, through the air. Most of you know Valerie's done well for herself, he said, nodding in my direction but not meeting my eyes. Built herself an empire out of code and computers. A few people chuckled politely. My mother shot him a glance, caution. Or encouragement, I couldn't tell. But what she doesn't understand, he continued, is that you don't buy respect. You earn it. Not with money. Not with Rolexes or restaurants. Now people were quiet. Still polite. But quiet. She thinks if she throws enough cash at a problem, it goes away, he said. And maybe that works in business. But in this house? It never did. He turned toward me, glass still raised. So here's to Valerie. For reminding us that no matter how far you go, if you forget where you came from, you're just lost in a bigger house. The room exhaled. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just set down my fork and folded my napkin, precise and silent. Then I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't toast back. Instead, I reached into my clutch and placed a sealed envelope next to my mother's wine glass. Effective Monday, I said. The deed is in your name. Fully. She blinked. What deed? The house, I said. You won't need to call me about the water heater again. My father stiffened. You're giving us the house? I looked at him for the first time that night. No, I said. I'm returning what should have never been in my name to begin with. The difference is, this time, I won't be fixing anything when it breaks. My mother opened the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly. But the taxes, you'll receive the bills directly now, no reroute. But the loan, Owen will explain that part. All heads turned. Owen looked up sharply. Me? You co-signed the last extension, I said. You forged my initials next to yours. Didn't think I'd catch that? Silence. His mouth opened. Closed. My father's voice dropped low. You're lying. I smiled. No, you just stopped checking. I left the dining room then, walking past faces frozen in the awkward mix of loyalty and disbelief. I didn't care which side they chose. I'd stopped investing in their verdicts. I reached the door when a voice, sharp, older, spoke from the far end of the table. Aunt Leslie, my mother's sister. Widowed. Quiet. Always 2 chairs down at family events. She said calmly, about time someone put a stop to the act. Everyone turned to her. She sipped her wine. She's not the problem, Aunt Leslie said. She's the consequence. My father slammed his glass down, but it cracked more than it shattered. When I reached, My car, my hands were steady. My breath even. But inside something smoldered. Not rage. Not grief. Finality. I drove home in silence. No music. No thoughts. Just the dull throb of reality shifting shape behind me. That night, while brushing my teeth, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in years, Daniel Klein, CFO of Haven Point. Subject line, I owe you the truth. I opened it. Inside was a thread of internal correspondence, screenshots of emails between my mother and an unnamed project manager. They had listed me as a silent investor in a shell company created to funnel funds into property maintenance, including the lake house, including a remodel I had never seen. Daniel's final line. I only stayed quiet because she said you approved it all. That it was for family. I see now that wasn't true. So they hadn't just taken my money. They'd used my name to create an investor profile to legitimize transactions. They'd made me complicit in their scheme, all while toasting to my absence. Didn't respond. I just archived the email and scheduled a call with my attorney for the morning. Because this wasn't about being heard anymore. It was about being done. 2 days after the dinner, I received the first call at 7:42 a.m., blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 5 minutes later, same thing. On the third ring, I picked up. It was my mother. Valerie, she said, tone light, airy, as if nothing had happened. Morning, sweetheart. I think the electric company made a mistake. We've got no power. No, I replied, placing my mug gently on the countertop. They didn't make a mistake. A beat of silence. I don't understand. I removed my name from all utility accounts. Last week, you should have received notice. Wait, you what? I stopped paying for things that aren't mine, Mom. You can't just... Valerie, we have no lights. The refrigerator, the heating. Your father needs his CPAP machine. Then he should pay the bill. Don't be like this, she said, and this time her voice dipped, the edge breaking through. You're punishing us. I'm correcting an imbalance. I hung up before she could reply. Not out of spite, but because I'd spent years listening to excuses dressed as needs, guilt repackaged as duty, and silence had always been my contribution. Now silence was my rebellion. By noon, I had received 4 more messages. 2 from Susan. 1 from Owen, sarcastic, defensive, crude, and 1 from an unknown number. You're really gonna let your own parents freeze because of pride? No signature. But the area code matched the lake house. I forwarded the number to my attorney. That afternoon, the gas was cut. I knew, because I'd been monitoring their accounts through an alert system Owen had forgotten to disconnect. The irony, I wasn't spying. They had given me access. They just never thought I'd use it for myself. That night I got another call, this time from a neighbor, Janine Summers. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Valerie, she began, too sweet. Your mom says they're struggling. She mentioned the furnace. I know it's not my place, but maybe just this once. They're adults, Janine, but you've always helped them. And that's the problem. I hung up. Then I disabled Janine's number. By the end of the week, they were down to candles. I know, because Susan posted a photo online, a dimly lit table with a flickering flame and a caption that read, "Making do. Some things can't be bought back once they're lost. No tags, no names." But the implication was loud. The comments poured in. Wishing you strength. Some kids forget who raised them. I can't believe she'd let it come to this. The real manipulation wasn't the message. It was the performance of suffering. She hadn't posted that for friends. She had posted that for me. The next morning, Owen showed up at my office. He didn't ask for permission, just stormed through the lobby, past my assistant, past the glass doors. You think this is a game? He spat. They're burning in there. I'm sure they'll manage, I said, not looking up. They're your parents. No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. They're your accomplices. Owen's jaw clenched. You're heartless. No. I'm just no longer useful to people who confuse access with affection, he paced, ran a hand through his hair. So, that's it? You're just going to walk away? No, I said calmly. I walked away the second I realized the only thing holding us together was my willingness to keep being used. He moved toward the desk. You don't get it. Dad's blood pressure is through the roof. He's not sleeping. And Mom, she's scared. You broke her. I stood, walked to the side cabinet, pulled a folder and dropped it in front of him. What's this? He asked. Everything I paid, every transfer, every medical bill, every loan, every debt I covered. He flipped through it. This doesn't justify what you're doing. No, I said, but it explains why I stopped. Owen stared at the numbers. I could see the denial crumbling bit by bit. Then he closed the folder, shoved it aside. You still could have warned us. I did, I said. Every time I said I was tired. Every time I asked for boundaries. Every time you joked that I was the family's walking wallet, you just didn't listen. He walked out without another word. That night, I received a call from my attorney. There's movement on the Haven Point account, he said. How bad? They're trying to redirect retroactive funds under your name, forged consent form. They're desperate. What are our options? I can file the cease and desist. But Valerie, this isn't financial anymore. It's personal. They're weaponizing your identity. I hung up, walked to the kitchen, made tea, sat in silence. Then I opened my laptop and wrote one line in a private file I'd been compiling for weeks. They will call it betrayal, but it's the first honest thing I've ever done. The next day, I shut down the remaining legacy accounts, ones my mother didn't know I still had control over. A fund she had quietly dipped into for medical emergencies. A recurring payment tied to Owen's old school loans. The final entry was for the car insurance. I let it lapse. And I did it without emotion. Because emotion was a language they had learned to counterfeit. But responsibility? That was still mine to own and release. When they call again, I won't pick up. Because this time, I'm not turning the lights back on. The letter arrived in a neutral envelope. No return address. But I knew the bank's formatting, down to the spacing in the header. I opened it at my kitchen counter, expecting maybe a delayed statement from an old savings account. Instead, it was a formal notice. Refinance denied due, to incomplete documentation and suspected forged consent. I didn't have a mortgage. Not anymore. I read it again. Then I saw the property ID, my parents' address. But the borrower listed, Valerie Reed, cosigner. They hadn't just tried to pull me back in financially. They had tried to rebuild the bridge I burned, using my signature. I sat down slowly. Not out of shock, but to anchor myself in the reality that I had, up until that second, still believed they had a limit. They didn't. I called the bank's fraud department. I gave them my ID, confirmed the signature wasn't mine, and requested a full access log. When they hesitated, I sent the cease and desist letter my lawyer had pre-written, just in case. That same day, I received a call from my attorney. They attempted to file a quitclaim deed last week, transferring the lake house back to your name. What? With your signature. Forged, obviously. I've already frozen all related assets and notified the state clerk. But Valerie... I know, I said. They're escalating. They're cornered, he replied. And people cornered long enough don't ask for forgiveness. They look for leverage. I ended the call and sat in the stillness of my house. My sanctuary, the only place untouched by their chaos. But for the first time, even it felt penetrable, contaminated by the lengths they were willing to go. Then came the message from Owen. You're overreacting. It's just paperwork. You act like they robbed a bank. They used my name to forge legal property claims, Owen. It was Mom's idea. She just panicked. She thought if the house was in your name again, maybe the bank would back off. You co-signed. There was no reply. I stared at my screen for a long time. Then I opened my email archives and searched Lake House. Thousands of results. I filtered down to contracts, permits, vendor logs. One caught my attention. It was from 18 months ago. A renovation invoice approved by Haven Point, signed V. Reed. But the design attached wasn't for accessibility or emergency repair. It was a luxury deck. Slate stone, heated flooring, custom railing. $2,400. That wasn't a lie born from panic. That was a lie built for comfort, and they'd buried it under the veneer of family survival. I forwarded the file to my attorney with a single line. I want them locked out of I. Everything by Monday. That weekend, I received a knock at my door. Not a call, not a text. My mother. Hair done, jacket pressed, makeup careful, but not obvious. She hadn't come to beg. She'd come to perform. I didn't want it to come to this, she said before I even opened the door fully. I said nothing, just waited. I only signed your name because I thought you'd eventually say yes. You always did. You didn't even ask. Her face flickered. You would have said no. That's not consent. It's survival, Valerie. No, I said, voice flat. It's fraud. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. Then the tears, not sudden, slow, steady, the kind you rehearse. She didn't cry out of shame. She cried because her script was failing. You want to see me suffer. I want to see you stop lying. We raised you, she whispered. We gave everything for you. I looked her dead in the eye. You raised a girl you never respected, and now that woman is the only reason you stayed afloat. She didn't reply. You want respect, I added, but you weaponized my silence. You mistook my care for consent, my money for your permission slip. I made mistakes, she said finally. You made decisions, I corrected. Mistakes have consequences. Decisions have fallout. When she left, I didn't watch her go. That night, I locked down everything. I hired a private investigator to confirm there were no active attempts to reopen accounts in my name. Then I changed every access point, biometric, signature, authorization, everything. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages, not from my family, from the press. Someone had leaked a Facebook post, a long, emotional letter, written by Susan, public, open. We've lost everything. Our daughter refuses to help. We don't understand why. We never asked for more than love. Attached were photos of the house in dim lighting. A photo of Raymond holding a mug, the handle cracked, the expression solemn. The comments were brutal. Pity poured in. Strangers offered money. One commenter wrote, "She should be ashamed. Filthy, rich, and heartless." Another said, "Maybe she forgot where she came from. Bet she'll remember when karma hits." I didn't reply. I didn't post a rebuttal. But I saved everything. Because public perception can be manipulated. But evidence speaks quietly. Legally. Permanently. The final message that night was from a number I didn't recognize. One sentence. If Dad ends up in the hospital from this stress, it's on you. No signature. But the words were familiar. The threat was predictable. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "No. It's on the people who chose lies over honesty, theft over dialogue, control over love." And then I blocked the number. Because guilt only works when there's still something to take, and I had given them everything, except my name. The envelope was thick, heavy stock, the kind realtors use when they want to appear more important than the foreclosure they're facilitating. It slid through my mail slot with a dull thud, and sat on my entryway table for hours before I touched it. I didn't need to open it to know what it contained. But I did anyway. Not for information, for confirmation. Valerie Reed, notice of auction. Property, 413 Oakline Drive. Beneficiary, State of California. Reason, delinquency, default, unauthorized refinance attempt. Attached was a list of outstanding debts and missed payments. I turned the page slowly. It wasn't the numbers that struck me. It was the line at the bottom. The property will be vacated within 30 days of public auction unless debt is reconciled. Ran my finger along the word public. A word that had once meant family shame now tasted like liberation. My lawyer had told me this would happen. After I submitted proof of forged signatures, retracted all joint authorizations, and refused to mediate a settlement on their behalf, the system did what it was designed to do. It stripped them of privileges they were never entitled to. And now, it was taking the house. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply printed 2 copies of the notice, folded them neatly, and hand-delivered them to the mailbox in front of their home, one addressed to Raymond, one to Susan. On the way back to my car, I noticed the curtains shift. They were watching. Didn't wave. That night, I booked 2 front-row seats at the auction. Reserved seating, one in my name, one marked guest. I never said I'd attend. I never said I wouldn't, but I wanted them to wonder. The morning of the auction, the sky cracked with early spring thunder. The kind of storm that arrives not to cleanse, but to disrupt. I parked 3 blocks away and walked, my boots soaking, through by the time I reached the county building. I wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a black coat and silence. Inside, a dozen people waited. Some realtors, some investors, a few vultures who always circled these things. Then I saw him. Owen. He didn't notice me at first. He was seated in the second row, flipping through the auction docket like it was a menu. When he finally looked up, his eyes locked with mine. Something in his posture faltered. I didn't nod. I didn't approach. I just walked past him and sat 2 rows behind, not beside. Not with. The auction began. Lot, the for 12, Oakline Drive. Opening bid, $50,000. Owen stood suddenly. There's been a mistake, he said. The auctioneer didn't flinch. Are you here to bid? Owen hesitated. This house belongs to my family. Then, your family should have paid for it, the man said without a blink. The room went still. A man in the back raised a card. 50,000, another. 60. I watched, detached, as my childhood home became a number, then a transaction, then a whisper. In 10 minutes, it was sold. The new owner stood, signed a clipboard, and left. Owen stayed seated, his face blank. When the room emptied, he finally turned to me. You let it happen. No, I said, voice even. They did. I tried to fix it, he muttered. You tried to bury it. He looked away. They don't know where to go. There are shelters, apartments, motels. Dad's not built for that. Neither was I. But I learned. His hands clenched. You always think you're better. No, I said. I think I stopped letting that thought scare me. He didn't follow me as I stood and walked out, but I felt his stare press against my back like a weight he had never learned to carry. Outside, rain hit the sidewalk in sheets. I stepped into it, not because I wanted to feel clean, because I no longer cared if I did. I returned to my car, slid behind the wheel, and checked my phone. A single voicemail from my mother. Her voice was hushed, almost reverent. I don't know. If you're listening anymore, maybe I deserve that. But this house, we built everything in it. Every memory, every fight, every laugh. It's all there. And now it's gone. She paused. I don't know where we'll go. Your father won't speak. Owens locked himself in the garage. But I know one thing. You never even gave us a chance to fix it. She hung up, and that was the moment I realized. She meant every word, because in her mind, I had taken something from them. She would never see it as justice, only betrayal. But there's no betrayal in refusing to be used. There's only clarity. Later that evening, I received a text from an unknown number. You didn't have to come today. I stared at it for a long time. Then I responded, yes. I did. Because sometimes, witnessing the end isn't about revenge, it's about record keeping. The week after the auction was the quietest week I had experienced in years. Not a text, not a call, not a tagged photo, just air and space. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like a vacuum, and I had to learn quickly not to confuse silence with peace. Because silence, real silence, is what comes. Before the pivot. It came on a Wednesday. I was in a meeting with our data infrastructure partners in Seattle when Grace, my assistant, stepped into the conference room. She held her phone like it was radioactive. It's about your parents, she whispered. I excused myself, took her phone, and read the email. Subject line: You need to see this. A link. I clicked. It was a Facebook video, publicly posted by a local news affiliate. 2 minutes and 34 seconds long. Captioned, Former mechanic and wife evicted after daughter cuts ties. Left with nowhere to go. The video opened with my father, Raymond, sitting on the edge of a donated, caught in what looked like a church basement. He looked smaller, thinner, weaker. The same hands that once rebuilt engines now trembled as he folded them in his lap. Then Susan, wrapped in a blanket, her voice breaking at all the right points. We never asked her for much. Just a little. Help. Family doesn't leave family behind. My name wasn't mentioned. Not once. But the comments were a wildfire. She sounds like a monster. Imagine abandoning your own parents. Bet she's some corporate robot who thinks money's more important than blood. The narrative had found its shape, and I was the villain. I didn't call. I didn't post a statement. I didn't correct the lie. Because that's what they wanted, reaction. And I knew something they didn't. When a lie gets too loud, it starts to swallow itself. I forwarded the video to my lawyer. 10 minutes later, I got a response. I'm more concerned with what they filed yesterday. Attached, a scanned letter from Susan Reed, sent to a private housing board, petitioning for emergency housing allocation, on the basis that their daughter had promised to support them indefinitely, and had then abandoned them without warning. Included were emails I'd written, clipped, edited, and arranged to suggest a lifetime commitment. One of them ended with, "You'll never have to worry, I've got you." But the original sentence had been longer. "You'll never have to worry about the roof, as long as you respect the boundaries we agree on. I've got you, as long as you don't use me." They had trimmed everything past the comma: manufactured obligation, legal manipulation, emotional blackmail, but dressed in official seals and structured grammar. My attorney was already filing a counterstatement. But as I sat at my desk, hands still, jaw tight, I realized something that made my stomach go cold. This wasn't about the house. It was about legacy. They weren't trying to get back into my finances. They were trying to control the narrative. A week later, the narrative shifted again. A blog post appeared. Not on Facebook this time, but on a parenting site, anonymous. But clearly Susan's writing. Title: When Your Child Forgets Who She Was Before the Money. It was a masterpiece of coded rage. She framed herself as the dignified matriarch, Raymond as the proud, humbled provider, Owen as the peacemaker caught in the storm. Me? I was simply referred to as the daughter. Cold, distant, lost to ambition. There was a photo, an old one, me at 15, covered in grease, sitting beside Raymond in the garage, smiling like I belonged there. She had kept it. Not because she treasured it, but because she knew it would become a weapon one day. That same evening, I received a direct message from someone I hadn't spoken to since grad school, Professor Ellen Clark. Political theory, ethics. She never used emojis, never wasted words. Her message: saw what they're doing. Don't flinch. You're the proof they fear. And with that, something settled in me. Not resolve, not vengeance, just clarity. I wasn't going to answer the media. I wasn't going to play defense. Instead, I posted a single photo. No caption, no hashtags. Just a screenshot of the forged mortgage agreement, with their names and mine side by side. Under it, one sentence: let the record correct the story. No emotion, no commentary. The comments flooded in, some outraged, some apologetic, some still clinging to the image they wanted to believe. But the narrative cracked. That night, my inbox was flooded with letters from people like me. Silent supporters. Survivors of family debt. Stories of forged documents, stolen savings, inheritance weaponized, guilt passed down like disease. They didn't want advice. They wanted proof they weren't alone. And I gave it to them. I gave them the documents. The trails, the quiet record-keeping, the absence of rage, because sometimes restraint is sharper than retaliation. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just my story anymore. I had been the currency. Now, I was the ledger. The next morning, I saw a new comment under my post. It was buried under hundreds. Simple, precise. You gave them everything but your voice. Now they can't silence it. Username eclark.northwesternedui stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered to myself, that's the last thing I'm giving them. The court hearing was brief, efficient, cold. My lawyer said it would take weeks. It took 17 minutes. When you're not fighting to win but only to clarify truth, things move faster than expected. The judge ruled in my favor. The forged documents my mother submitted were now formally labeled as what they were: criminal fraud. Her expression didn't change. Neither did my father's. They sat there, stone-faced, as if the gavel had struck some other family's name. I walked past them on my way out. No words, no glance. It wasn't anger that carried me past their silence. It was nothing. The kind of nothing you arrive at after you've grieved the living. The kind of nothing that frees you. By the following Friday, the bank accounts tied. To my name had been severed. The house was no longer insured under my umbrella. The utilities shut off in compliance with the final deadline. I even retracted the monthly automatic grocery deliveries to their address. Every rope I had ever tied between us was undone, not with fire, but with precision. The media didn't call anymore. The comment sections cooled. A few bloggers tried to stir up the story again, but without a response from me, the storm lost. Oxygen. I had outlasted them, but one message got through. It was from Owen, a single paragraph. No apology, no explanation. Just this: I never thought you'd go through with it. They didn't either. I think that's why it hurts more. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Owen wasn't writing to reconnect. He was writing to measure the wound. 3 weeks later, I sat alone in the garden behind my office. It was early morning, fog still on the hedges, coffee still warm. My team was inside prepping for a stakeholder briefing, but I wasn't thinking about logistics or KPIs. I was reading an email from a woman named Tanya from Michigan. She wrote, I saw your documents. My brother forged a loan in my name. I never told anyone. I thought it was just what sisters did. Thank you for showing me that protecting peace isn't the same as staying silent. I responded with a single line. You're not alone. That afternoon, I submitted the first manuscript draft of what would later become The Quiet Exit. a book about financial betrayal within families, about dignity as a quiet act of war, about how to leave without burning everything down, and still, be sure they feel the absence. When the book launched 6 months later, it included a dedication. To every son or daughter who kept the lights on, bought the gifts, swallowed their pride, and were still told they weren't enough. You're not selfish, you're not broken, you're just done. The story didn't end with revenge, it ended with clarity. And clarity, once you taste it, rewires you. I don't wake up waiting for an apology anymore. I don't scan old photos for proof that I once mattered. I no longer chase redemption in the eyes of people who never learned how to see me. To anyone watching this, let me say this plainly. You can give everything: money, time, compassion. You can pay the bills and still get billed for your soul. But the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop justifying your worth in someone else's broken ledger, that's the moment you get to live. And living isn't about vengeance. It's about refusal. Refusal to be currency. Refusal to be access. Refusal to be rewritten. So if you're there now, stuck in the limbo between guilt and clarity, ask yourself this. If they had to choose between their comfort and your dignity, how many times did they choose? Exactly. Leave the ledger, start the book. If this story meant something to you, if it helped you see yourself clearer, or gave you the strength to consider walking your own quiet exit, subscribe to this channel. Help us keep sharing stories that don't scream for attention but carve space for truth. We'll be here. And you? You're not alone. Subscribe now and let the next story find you when you're ready.